They locked her in the dark because she didn't fit their picture of perfection. She was too heavy, too solid, too real for a family built on fragile lies. But when the city's most ruthless boss came to collect a debt, he didn't want the polished diamonds upstairs. He wanted the secret buried in the basement. The basement smelled of iron, damp concrete, and the faint, bitter tang of old paper. Maeve knew every inch of it. She knew which floorboards above would groan when someone walked down the hallway. She knew that at 3:14 p.m., a single blade of sunlight would pierce the high, grated window near the ceiling, illuminating the dust motes for exactly 22 minutes before the neighboring building swallowed the sun. And she knew that her father, Arthur Gallagher, was currently sweating through his custom-tailored suit. Maeve sat on the edge of a mattress that had long lost its shape, the springs protesting softly under her weight. She pulled her oversized wool sweater tighter around her shoulders. The basement was always cold, an ache that settled deep into the marrow, but Maeve was built for survival. She was a large woman. Fat. It was a word her father used as a weapon, a curse spat through gritted teeth before he finally decided to lock her away. In Arthur's world, women were currency. They were supposed to be slender, fragile things, easily traded to other ambitious men in exchange for shipping routes or union votes. Maeve had refused to starve. She had refused to shrink. She took up space. She had soft, wide hips, heavy thighs, and a belly that curved outward, soft and unapologetic. When she was 18, Arthur realized she would never fit into the designer dresses he bought for her younger sister, Lydia. He realized no shallow underboss was going to pay a premium for a bride who looked like a Renaissance painting rather than a runway model. So he told his associates she was sick, a rare nervous condition. "Sent her to a private facility in Switzerland," he said, pouring them a glass of scotch as he sighed with feigned paternal grief. In reality, he walked her down the wooden stairs to the cellar, locked the reinforced steel door, and threw a mattress on the floor. That was 4 years ago. Now, at 22, Maeve existed as a ghost in the foundation of her own home. She survived on the meals the terrified housekeeper slipped through the dog door at the bottom of the stairs, and she occupied her mind with the garbage Arthur threw away. Specifically, his discarded ledgers. Above her, the vent rattled. Voices drifted down through the aluminum ductwork, distorted but legible. "I assure you, Mr. Vane, the shipments from the docks have been light because of the new customs enforcement. It's a temporary dip, nothing more." That was Arthur, his voice pitched up at the end, a dead giveaway. He was lying and he was terrified. A temporary dip. The second voice was a low, resonant baritone. It didn't echo, it absorbed the air around it. Dominic Vane. "A 30% drop in revenue over 6 months isn't a dip, Arthur. It's a hemorrhage." Maeve leaned her head against the concrete wall, closing her eyes. She pictured the dining room upstairs, the crystal chandelier, Lydia sitting perfectly straight in a tight silk dress, her clavicles sharp enough to cut glass, probably instructed by Arthur to bat her eyelashes and pour Dominic's wine. And Dominic Vane himself, the head of the most brutal syndicate on the East Coast. Maeve had never seen him, but she had heard the whispers from the guards who sometimes smoked near her high window. They said Vane didn't negotiate. He amputated. If a piece of his organization was rotting, he cut it off. Arthur was rotting. Maeve reached under her mattress and pulled out a battered leather notebook. It was one of Arthur's old ledgers, thrown down the basement stairs 2 years ago in a fit of rage. Maeve had fished a nub of a pencil from a dusty corner and spent months reverse engineering her father's accounting. She didn't have the current books, but she understood his methodology. Arthur was skimming. He was shifting funds through dummy shell corporations tied to local waste management, but his math was sloppy. He was masking his theft by inflating the customs tariffs on paper. "I have the books right here," Arthur said, his voice trembling through the vent. "You can look them over yourself. Everything is accounted for. And please, have some more wine. Lydia, pour Mr. Vane another glass." "I don't want wine," Dominic said. The scrape of a chair against the hardwood floor echoed loudly. He was standing up. "And I don't want to look at the books you prepared for me. I want to look at the books you didn't prepare for me." I don't know what you mean. Those are the only records." "You think I'm an idiot, Arthur?" The danger in Dominic's voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. "I know you're bleeding me. I just need to know where you hid the money. If you tell me now, I walk out of here, and you just lose your territory. If you make me find it myself, you lose a lot more than that." Silence hung heavy in the vent. Maeve held her breath. Her heart thumped, a steady, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the solid, comforting mass of her own body. She was safe down here, she told herself. Arthur had hidden her so well that even a mob boss wouldn't find her. "Check the house," Dominic ordered. Footsteps exploded above, heavy boots thudding against the Persian rugs, doors being thrown open, furniture dragging. Lydia let out a short, terrified shriek. "You can't do this!" Arthur yelled, panic finally breaking his veneer of control. "I'm an earner for you. This is my home." "This is my property," Dominic corrected coldly, "until you pay back what you stole." Down in the dark, Maeve stood up. The cold floor bit through her thick socks. She didn't know what they were looking for: cash, gold, a second set of books, but she knew they were going to tear the house apart down to the studs. She backed into the darkest corner of the basement, near the massive iron boiler that clanked and hissed throughout the winter. She pressed her back against the brick, her broad shoulders squaring. She wasn't afraid of dying. She had been dead for 4 years, but she was afraid of the light. She was afraid of the look of disgust that always painted men's faces when they looked at her. The heavy footsteps moved toward the kitchen, toward the basement door. "This one is locked," a gruff voice called out. "It's just the cellar," Arthur shouted, his voice suddenly frantic. "Just old furniture. Rats. There's nothing down there, I swear to God." That was a mistake. Arthur's panic was a flare in the night. "Open it," Dominic commanded. A heavy thud against the wood. Then another. The steel frame groaned. Maeve gripped the ledger tightly against her stomach. She could hear the splintering of wood, the sharp crack of the deadbolt giving way. The door swung open, hitting the wall at the top of the stairs with a violent crash. Light spilled down the wooden steps, harsh and blinding. Maeve squeezed her eyes shut. Heavy, deliberate footsteps began to descend. Not the rushed, chaotic stomping of a foot soldier. These were the measured, inevitable steps of a man who owned the ground he walked on. Dominic Vane stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He reached up and pulled the chain on the single, bare, incandescent bulb hanging from the ceiling. It flared to life, casting harsh, yellow shadows across the sprawling basement. He stood tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit his broad frame flawlessly. His face was sharp, angular, etched with deep lines of exhaustion and ruthlessness. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark and turbulent, scanning the damp concrete, the discarded boxes, the rusted boiler, and then they stopped on her. Maeve didn't shrink back. There was nowhere left to go. She stood by the boiler, her hands clasped defensively over the leather ledger at her waist. The oversized grey sweater hung off her shoulders, but it couldn't hide her shape. She was a mountain of soft curves and solid flesh in a world of sharp edges. Her dark hair was a wild, unbrushed mane falling down her back. She kept her chin lifted, her dark eyes locking onto his. Dominic didn't speak. He didn't pull a gun. He didn't recoil. He just stared. His eyes tracked over her. He took in the fullness of her face, the defiant set of her jaw, the heavy slope of her breasts, the wide curve of her hips. Maeve braced herself for the sneer. She waited for the cruel comment, the disgusted laugh. It was the reaction she had received her entire life, the very reason her father had buried her alive. But Dominic didn't sneer. Something shifted in his expression. The dead, cold pragmatism in his eyes fractured, replaced by a sudden, intense heat. It wasn't the look of a man finding a hostage. It was the look of a starving man finding a feast. He took a slow step forward. "Who are you?" His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Maeve's chest. "Maeve," she said. Her voice was raspy from disuse, but steady. She refused to tremble. "Arthur's daughter." Upstairs, a muffled shout of protest echoed down the stairwell, followed by the sound of a slap. Dominic didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes locked on Maeve. "Arthur's daughters are Lydia and Chloe. Chloe is married to the Greco family in Boston. Lydia is currently crying in the dining room." Dominic took another step closer, his gaze dropping momentarily to the worn leather notebook clutched against her stomach. "He doesn't have a third. He doesn't have a third he wants to claim," Maeve corrected bluntly. "I didn't fit the aesthetic." Dominic stopped a few feet away from her. The sheer size of him was intimidating up close, but Maeve held her ground. She was a large woman. She wasn't easily dwarfed. But Dominic made her feel the magnetic pull of his presence. He looked at the meager setup, the sunken mattress, the dog door for food, the bucket in the corner. His jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek ticked. "He kept you down here." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. And underneath the calm delivery, Maeve heard the faintest edge of absolute, murderous rage. "For 4 years," she said flatly. "If you're looking for the stolen money, it isn't down here. The only thing in this basement is me." "What's in the book?" he asked, nodding toward her hands. Maeve looked down at the ledger. This was her only leverage. She didn't know Dominic Vane, but she knew men like him. They respected utility. They respected intelligence. If she was just a pathetic victim in a basement, he would leave her here. Or worse, he would hand her back to Arthur. "It's his old ledger," Maeve said, holding it out slightly but not handing it over. "From 2 years ago. He threw it away. I pulled it out of the trash." "Why?" "Because the dark gets boring," she said dryly. "And because my father is a moron." Dominic tilted his head, a dark, genuine amusement sparking in his eyes. "Is he?" "He's skimming from you," Maeve said, laying her cards on the table. "I heard you talking through the vent. You think he's hiding it in dummy shell corporations tied to waste management." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "That's standard practice." "It is. Which is why it's a decoy," Maeve said, stepping out from the shadow of the boiler. The light hit her fully now, illuminating the pale, soft skin of her throat. Dominic's eyes tracked the movement, lingering on the curve of her neck before snapping back to her eyes. "He isn't hiding the money in waste management. He's bleeding it through the concrete supply lines. He's writing off 30% of the raw materials as spoilage due to moisture damage at the docks. Concrete doesn't spoil in those containers if it's sealed properly. He's selling the extra 30% to non-union contractors in the suburbs for cash. The waste management shells are just there to keep your auditors busy." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Dominic stared at her. His mind was working rapidly, piecing together the breadcrumbs of Arthur's sloppy accounting that had irritated him for months. She had just solved a puzzle his best accountants had been banging their heads against, and she had done it sitting on a rotten mattress in the dark from memory. He looked at the brilliant, sharp mind hiding behind the soft, heavy body that Arthur Gallagher had deemed worthless. Arthur had paraded a starving, vapid girl upstairs while locking a goddamn queen in the cellar. Dominic closed the distance between them. He was close enough now that Maeve could smell his cologne, cedar, smoke, and something distinctly metallic. She had to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact. He didn't reach for the book. He reached for her. His large, calloused hand came up, hovering for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently brushed the messy hair away from her face. His thumb traced the soft, full curve of her cheek. The touch was shocking. Maeve gasped softly, her lips parting. She hadn't been touched with anything but violence or rough indifference in years. Dominic's eyes darkened, dropping to her mouth, then down the heavy, beautiful lines of her body. He didn't see flaws. He saw abundance. He saw warmth in a cold, brutal world. He saw a woman who hadn't let the dark break her. "You figured all that out from an old book and an air vent?" he murmured, his thumb still resting against her jaw. "I have a lot of free time," she whispered, her heart hammering wildly. Footsteps clattered down the stairs. One of Dominic's men appeared in the doorway, gun drawn, sweeping the room before lowering it when he saw his boss. "Boss, we didn't find the cash. We found a safe behind a painting, but it's empty." Arthur's begging on his knees. Dominic didn't look back at the soldier. He kept his eyes locked on Maeve. His thumb slid down to rest against the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. "Tell Arthur he doesn't owe me the money anymore," Dominic said, his voice ringing with chilling finality. The soldier hesitated. "You're forgiving the debt?" "No," Dominic said softly, his gaze dropping to the swell of Maeve's chest as she breathed. "I'm taking an alternative form of payment. And then you're going to break both of Arthur's legs." Maeve froze. "What?" Dominic finally stepped back, though his eyes never left hers. He shrugged off his expensive charcoal suit jacket and stepped forward again, wrapping it around Maeve's wide shoulders. The jacket was warm, carrying his heat, heavy and protective. He pulled the lapels together across her chest, his knuckles brushing her collarbone. "You're done with the dark, Maeve," Dominic said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. It was a vow. "You're coming with me." The ride to the estate was a blur of streetlights and rain. Maeve kept her face pressed to the tinted window of the armored SUV. The world was too big, too fast, and entirely too loud. Her hands gripped the leather of Dominic's jacket, drawing its heavy, smoky scent deep into her lungs. It grounded her. Dominic didn't bombard her with questions. He sat opposite her, his large frame relaxed, but his eyes watchful. He recognized shell shock when he saw it. The Vane compound sat on 40 acres of forested land outside the city. Iron gates, armed guards, a sprawling stone manor that looked like a fortress dressed up as a home. When the SUV parked, the driver jumped out to open the door. Maeve hesitated. The driveway was vast and open to the night sky. There were no walls holding her in. Dominic stepped out first. He turned and offered his hand. It wasn't a demand. It was an anchor. She placed her trembling fingers in his palm. His grip was warm and calloused, steadying her as she stepped onto the gravel. Inside, the house was a study in controlled wealth. Dark wood, muted lighting, the soft crackle of a massive fireplace. Dominic didn't hand her off to staff. He led her straight to the kitchen. It was an industrial-scale space of stainless steel and marble, currently empty except for an older woman with sharp eyes and a kind mouth. "Martha," Dominic said quietly. "Maeve is hungry." Martha didn't stare at Maeve's size, nor her ratty sweater, nor her bare, dirty feet. "I have a roast chicken, potatoes and fresh bread. Give me 10 minutes. Dominic guided Maeve to a heavy oak table in the dining room, adjacent to the kitchen. He pulled out a chair for her. When she sat, she instinctively made herself small, hunching her wide shoulders, pulling her arms tight against her thick waist. Dominic sat in the chair beside her. He reached out and gently tapped her forearm. "Stop." Maeve looked up, startled. "Stop shrinking," he said. His voice was a low, even hum. "You don't have to apologize for taking up space in my house, Maeve. Put your elbows on the table. Breathe." She blinked, her throat tightening. She forced her shoulders to drop. She let her arms rest on the wood. Martha arrived with plates. The smell of rosemary, roasted fat, and butter hit Maeve like a physical blow. Her stomach cramped violently. For 4 years, she had survived on cold scraps. A piece of stale bread, half a bowl of tepid soup. Arthur had decreed that since she was uselessly heavy, she didn't deserve to enjoy the calories she consumed. Maeve stared at the golden, crispy skin of the chicken, the steam rising from the potatoes. Her mouth watered painfully. But she didn't move. The old, vicious voice of her father hissed in her ear. "Look at you. A pig at the trough. No wonder nobody wants you." "Eat," Dominic instructed softly. "I shouldn't," she whispered, shame burning hot and thick in her chest. I'm already. "If you say the word fat as an insult, I'm going to be annoyed," Dominic interrupted. He picked up his own fork. "You survived in a concrete box because your body was strong enough to keep you alive. Your father starved you, and you didn't break. I don't look at you and see a flaw, Maeve. I see a survivor." He cut a piece of chicken and ate it. He didn't watch her, granting her the privacy to fight her own demons. Maeve picked up her fork. Her hand shook. She speared a potato and put it in her mouth. The taste of salt and butter was a violent explosion of life on her tongue. A tear slipped down her cheek, hot and fast. She wiped it away furiously and took another bite. Then a piece of chicken. Then bread. She ate until she was full. Not until she was sick, but until the hollow ache in her bones finally subsided. Dominic poured her a glass of water. "Better?" he asked. "Yes." She took a deep breath, her broad chest expanding. She looked at him, really looked at him. The dangerous mob boss, the man who ordered bones broken with a casual nod. "Why did you take me, Dominic? And please don't say it was out of the goodness of your heart. Men like you don't do charity." A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It changed him entirely, stripping away the polished businessman and revealing the predator beneath. "No, we don't." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I took you because you're a genius, Maeve. You sat in a lightless room and unraveled a financial scheme that baffled my top guys. Arthur stole $5 million from me. I want it back. And then I want to take everything else he has. Every warehouse, every contract, every dime. And you want me to help you?" "I want you to lead the charge," Dominic corrected. "You know how his mind works. You know his weaknesses. I have the muscle. You have the map." Maeve felt a spark ignite in her chest. It wasn't the frantic adrenaline of fear. It was power. It was the thrill of vengeance. "I'll need a laptop," she said, her voice dropping its tremor. "And your current ledgers. All of them." Dominic's smile widened. "Done." 3 months later, the basement was a memory. Maeve stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominic's downtown office, looking out at the city's skyline. She was not the same woman who had cowered behind a rusted boiler. She wore a tailored burgundy wrap dress that cinched at her waist and draped beautifully over her wide hips and heavy thighs. The silk clung to her soft, abundant curves, unapologetic and bold. Her dark hair was blown out, falling in thick, glossy waves over her shoulders. She didn't hide anymore. There was no need. The heavy oak doors of the office swung open. Dominic walked in, followed by 2 of his soldiers, and between them, struggling in a wheelchair with casts on both legs, was Arthur Gallagher. Arthur looked 10 years older. His hair was thinning. His expensive suit hung loose on his suddenly gaunt frame. The territory he had spent 30 years building had been systematically dismantled, hollowed out from the inside. Contracts were cancelled overnight, stash houses raided, bank accounts drained. He was a ruined man, brought in to beg for his life. "Dominic," Arthur rasped, wheeling himself forward a few inches. "Please, you took it all. You have your money. Just let me walk away." Dominic walked to his massive mahogany desk and leaned against the front of it, crossing his arms. He looked bored. "I didn't take your empire, Arthur." Arthur blinked, confused. "What?" "I'm a violent man," Dominic said casually. "I break things. I don't dismantle them with absolute precision. That requires a different kind of mind." Dominic tilted his head toward the windows. Arthur turned his head. Maeve turned around. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Arthur stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. He looked at the silk dress. He looked at the heavy gold watch on her thick wrist. He looked at the cold, dead calm in her dark eyes. "Hello, Father," Maeve said. Her voice didn't waver. It cut through the air like a blade. "Maeve?" Arthur choked out. He looked back at Dominic in sheer panic, then back at his daughter. You did this? How? You're a fat pig? A useless girl?" Maeve walked slowly across the plush carpet, her heels clicking softly. She stopped a few feet from his wheelchair. She loomed over him, using her size, using her presence to swallow the room. "You locked me in the dark because I didn't look right in your photographs. You thought I was stupid just because I was heavy. But down in the dark, Arthur, there's nothing to do but read and plan." Arthur's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. He was sweating. "Maeve, please, I'm your father. I protected you. You buried me," she corrected coldly. "I traced every single shell company you set up in the Caymans. I rerouted the funds from your concrete suppliers to Dominic's holding accounts. I called the union reps and showed them your secondary books. They hate you, by the way. Your empire is gone, Arthur. And I am the one who pressed the delete button." Arthur looked broken. The realization that the daughter he discarded had engineered his total destruction shattered the last of his pride. He slumped in his chair, weeping silently. Maeve felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Just the clean, empty closure of a wound finally cauterized. She looked at Dominic. He gave a sharp nod to his soldiers. "Take him to the airport," Dominic ordered. "Put him on a one-way flight to Anchorage. If he comes back to this city, put him in the ground." The guards wheeled the sobbing man out of the office. The heavy doors clicked shut. The silence returned. But this time it was warm. Maeve let out a long, slow breath. The tension finally leaked out of her spine. She walked over to Dominic's desk. He reached out, his large hands settling perfectly onto her wide hips, pulling her flush against him. He looked up at her, his storm cloud eyes dark with open reverence. He didn't just love her mind. He was obsessed with her body. He worshipped the softness of her belly, the heavy weight of her breasts, the thick, solid strength of her thighs. He made her feel entirely, devastatingly beautiful. "You were magnificent," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the soft curve of her stomach through the silk dress. Maeve smiled, a genuine, radiant thing. She ran her fingers through his dark hair. "I was thorough." Dominic stood up, pulling her tightly against his chest. He kissed her, deep and bruising, a promise sealed in flesh and breath. "No more dark, Maeve," he whispered against her lips. "You own the city now." She held him back, feeling the heavy, solid truth of his words. She was Maeve. She took up space, and she was never going back in the box. If this story gripped you, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, Share this video with someone who loves a dark, thrilling romance, where the underestimated heroine finally gets her revenge, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment of Maeve's revenge? We upload fresh, intense dramas every week, so stay tuned for more.